Welcome everyone. I'm very glad that you're here. Tonight we have a lecture of our current Ela Bhatt visiting professor, Akua Opokua Britwum from Ghana. We are delighted to have her here. I personally am really happy that she's here because we got to know her already when we were visiting Ghana a few months ago. And so we are indeed pleased that our students and our colleagues here can all now profit from her knowledge and wisdom. We have today's topic, capitalist accumulation and whole economy in northern Ghana. Let me first, before we start, introduce Akua, because she's not only here visiting professor, she's associate professor at the University of Cape Coast, and she holds a PhD from Maastricht University in the Netherlands. She obtained her first and second degrees from the University of Ghana, UG, Legon, and she also holds a postgraduate certificate in education from the University of Cape Coast. Her research and publications cover numerous issues, from sexual harassment to the economics of violence against women, gender mainstreaming in Ghanaian universities, gender and land rights, gender and leadership in trade unions, organizing informal economy workers, and as well as trade union participation and representation. So she fits perfectly into the International Center for Development and Decent Work. And furthermore, she has served UCC in various capacities, such as a member of the Cape Coast Strategic Planning Monitoring Committee. She's been Hall Counselor of Adesia Hall at the University of Cape Coast and a member of the Center for Development Studies Advisory Board Examinations Officer. And she's been a chairperson of the UCC Basic Schools Management Committee. Also, she's been International Education Coordinator and at the African Workers' Participation Development Program of the UCC International Support Center. She has served as a guest lecturer not only here at the ICGD in Kassel. She is also an Associate Fellow of the Global Labour University, and in addition, she was, until recently, the convener of the Women's Rights Association, the Network for Women's Rights in Ghana. Other positions she has held include the African Regional Focal Person at the International Research Network for Domestic Workers, and this is something I found extremely interesting, she's been a member of the Structural Adjustment Participatory Review Initiative, the SAPRI, where she was on the Civil Society Technical Committee. And actually, I should try to persuade you to give another lecture on this experience you had there, because this is where the World Bank, in an effort to engage civil society, undertook a participatory review of the structural adjustment programs in numerous countries, where Akua was one of the experts of the Ghana country case study. And when it turned out that the results were far more negative than the World Bank had anticipated, it actually tried to drop out. And this whole experience of the SAPRI process, I think, holds many lessons for questions of protest and reform of the global economy and the extent to which institutions go when they are supposed to learn things they don't want to learn. So, not to keep you any longer, I will now hand over to Akua, and I'm very curious about what you're going to tell us about capitalist accumulation in northern Ghana.
Thank you very much for this introduction and outlining my background. Sometimes then it brings out certain expectations, and I hope that I meet these expectations. I must say that I'm also very grateful for this facility that offered me this 3-month space at ICDD. I really have had a good time, free from all kinds of administrative responsibilities to concentrate and all that. And it's also good not to be in a position of decision making and having a number of people take care of me and everybody. It's been wonderful. It's like being at home, and I've really enjoyed my stay here. It's gone faster than I wish, despite the snow. Everything is good here. Yeah, so I want to talk about capitalist accumulation and the rural economy in northern Ghana. And in doing this, I just want to share a little bit about the study area. But before I do that, let me say that it's still work in progress, and I'm still there are a number of conceptual issues, theoretical issues that I'm grappling with, that I find exciting, that I'm trying to put together. And then the data also, there are issues still emerging and all that. So I present this as work in progress and expect a lot of feedback that will challenge me and give me a new perspective to look at the issues that I'm doing. Even though I say that northern Ghana, it really is about a particular place in northern Ghana. We use this phrase northern Ghana to refer to 3 regions in the north of Ghana. We bunch them together because they have a particular experience of poverty, and which poverty has a historical context, but also related more in terms of the geographical, climatic conditions as well. So there's specific places. I'll show these places on the map as well. There were 3 districts within this region. I will explain why this region in a minute. But we looked at households and the interest in the households. The qualifying criteria for the household was that a member of the household should either be in Obuasi, and Obuasi is a gold mining town, or should be a returned migrant from Obuasi. We covered 120 individual interviews, and this was done just this year. Now, this research really is part of an ICDD research cluster, and which research cluster is a collaboration between the University of Kassel and the University of Witwatersrand, and it includes Dr. Ben Scully and Professor Eddie Webster, of course, very familiar to a number of people here. Now, what this research seeks to do is to look at rural-urban linkages, but the linkages really would be a connection between a rural area that has a long labor sending history to an urban area, and this is how come we chose the Upper West region. So last year, around this time, or maybe earlier, I was in South Africa, and we did a data gathering in South Africa, and then this year Ben joined us in Ghana, and we did the data gathering in Ghana. Now, this the traditional thing when we are doing comparative research is for teams to do research in their locations and then meet and compare. But this one changed the dynamics a bit, and both researchers were in the various countries. And it really, if research projects can afford this, I would want to encourage that people do this, because then you come from your own context into another context, and certain things you take for granted just hit you, and so you go back asking questions, and this is what got me to start asking questions as well. So before I tell you the specific things, let me tell you a little bit about the Upper West region. Well, a bit about Ghana. So this is Ghana in the map of Africa, very small. And yeah, this is where we are located. It takes 6 hours to fly to South Africa down here. And this is the Upper West region in, a bit about the population, but the Upper West region, that's where it is in the corner. And we are located down here in Cape Coast, so that it was really traveling across the country. And with the kinds of routes we have, it took 8 hours to do this trip. But it was a good vehicle, and it was also a useful exercise for me to get to see my own country in ways that I don't. Okay. So a little bit more about the Upper West region, and these are the districts. I'm sorry that is not clear, but then we were right here in this corner, one of the districts, and we were also here, and then we were here. Okay, yeah. But why the Upper West region? So I've already mentioned it holds 1/3 of the Ghanaian population, and but it has all the negative indicators, all of them. The high rates of poverty, high rates of inequality, and in fact, it's saying that it has the highest rate of increase in inequality since 1990s at all. And the fact that about 88% of the households rely on crop production as their main livelihoods. Okay. Now, the conceptual issues that I'm engaging, because this really is an area that has over a century connection with gold mining, right? So you wonder why it should account for such high levels of poverty. It's over a century of gold mining. And so a number of things came up because in this research, we really were looking at we were pushing the land labor livelihoods connection, but we're doing this because we were seeking to understand more different levels of trade union activism and how issues can be brought together, and the fact that trade unions really, workers have a strong connection with land in these two countries, and if their well-being and levels of reproduction are situated within the whole land connection, then it becomes possible to link the framing of their contestations and all that. Because the whole point is that union revitalization have engaged, the debates of union revitalization have been engaged just within labor and labor as an industrialized force. But this debate is saying that let's look at the connection and let's see what happens. Initially, I had been attracted by this whole conception of labor regimes, and that's really workers and their engagement in the workplace. It's not just a workplace issue. It extends beyond the workplace, and that the social, cultural milieu within which the industry is situated also creates other institutions that then workers engage in their struggles for better working conditions. This really was used in a study by Nigerian textile workers. Yeah. Then the other thing also that have attracted my attention is articulation, as explained by Roberts. Now, I got attracted to the whole question of articulation because there is this whole debate that you know that the colonial experience in Africa has differed because of the ways in which land dispossession had taken place. So there are different forms of land dispossession. So you go to South Africa where there's complete dispossession. You go to Kenya where there's a mixture of this dispossession, but then still a claim to land. But then you come to areas like West Africa, in particular Ghana, where you still have still customary hold on land. So this tenure system exists. People have said, well, maybe the mosquito and the malaria has something to do with it. That's like I never had a settler in this thing. But beyond that also is the fact that attempts to use legal means to forcibly acquire land and vest it in the crown was not possible. Some have said that it was because of the resistance in Ghana. Others have said that, well, that resistance played a role. But then it also was the way in which the colonial administration realized that there was no need, because its interests were served through peasant production forms. And this whole existence then of pre-capitalist production forms existing alongside capitalist production forms in the colony was something that interested me. And also the fact that I have an interest in the informal economy. How do you explain the connection between the informal economy and the mainstream economy? So I find Robert's notion of articulation really very interesting. So it is within this that I come to the whole question of the land labor livelihood. But let me talk a little bit about articulation and then use that to explain. So this whole thing about articulation, as I've explained, the fact that for us in Africa, as against the European example, but maybe not just Africa also, is the same experience in Latin America, that capitalism did not evolve, it was imposed, right? And this imposition takes different forms, okay? In certain places is imposed in such a way that all pre-capitalist forms of production modes are completely dismantled, right? But in our case, it is not dismantled. The dual economy approach has said that, well, this is the backward economy that's refusing to modernize and has to be forced to modernize. But Roberts is saying that no, it is deliberate because it serves a particular interest. So it's not as if there is any dislink, but it's part and parcel of it as well. So then you can see how in certain places it exists and operates very effectively within it, even though the literature would make us believe that it doesn't. And this he contrasts with this articulation, what I said, the complete destruction of existing modes, and normally called pacification. And pacification belies the violence. You know, if you go to Latin America, let's talk about even North America. You know, the decimation of the indigenous populations and all that through all kinds of means and everything. Algeria in Africa and all that, and then rearticulation. Rearticulation then is imposition of the capitalist systems and all that. But we are interested in this thing. In questions of articulation. How does it work? How does this articulation work? There's a direct incorporation. In our case in Ghana, peasant production modes into capitalist production through export crops. So we find that in our own history in Ghana, when we started export crops, we started with oil palm production, and oil palm production really, it started with harvesting from the wild, but then the production really are on peasant farms, no plantations. We go the same way to cocoa production. To date, there are no cocoa plantations, and Ghana, for it, I think is about a third. It depends on the producer price and how much goes over the border. I hear Burkina Faso is also exporting cocoa, and it's coming from cocoa smuggled from Ghana as well. But we've held quite a strong position in cash crop production, cocoa, through peasant production forms. So I'm talking about small holdings by households. You are lucky if you have 4 or 5 acres. But then just accumulating this and then being able to produce so that we can satisfy the world's consumption of cocoa, right? So there was no need to move peasants off their farm. no need for any capitalist to invest in plantations and hire workers. So that has existed. So that's a direct. Now it is the indirect that one is interested in, where peasant production then subsists on subsistence production. So within the cash crop, there's a lot of subsistence production. And how then does this peasant production support the accumulation, the capitalist accumulation? Because it's not necessary to pay so much for cocoa, because then peasants and their reproduction is done, their social reproduction is done through what do you call it? The subsistence production. Okay. So this whole thing, the literature is saying it is built on a certain kind of land access. Land access has to still be maintained through the communal form and all that. But then also there has to be a careful balance. People should want to go back to their land, but they should also want to come to the rural, the urban communities to offer waged labor as well. So it's done with taxes and also consumption items, creating in people the desire to own consumption items. And in our own research, we found out that having a corrugated roof over your house was something that pushed people to migrate, and also having a bicycle and all that as well. So the other thing also is the whole question of low wages. And one of the things that's really characteristic of mine work is the low wage, both in Ghana and South Africa were discovered. The literature talks about how the African worker was categorized as lazy target workers, and they only worked for a target, and once they achieved the target, they left. They did not have any commitment to workplace. So if they were paid too much, then they would reach their target too quickly, and then they would move off. And people have said, well, really, this was just a way of justifying this whole thing about target work. And a number of literature have looked at different forms, and people have said that even this whole thing about just desertion was one way of resisting it. But the whole point is that migration becomes a principal tool in all this, moving labor, so that this fluid movement for a particular time, and then to peasant farming, and then you come back to the mines to work, is maintained. And some have said that even the past laws within South Africa was one way also of regulating this flow as well. So how am I trying to extend this into the land labor livelihood debate? I broaden it, okay, to look at then what forms of wages do workers that move between these spaces do they rely on for their own labor reproduction? But beyond them, as a generation, also the intergenerational reproduction. So these two quotes I find really very interesting. So some have called it a subsidy thesis. The difference between what the employer pays and what workers require for social reproduction, and how the rural household provides it. And then Scully again, actually he engaged this thing a lot, and that really is his focus. So I draw a lot from this work that I'm quoting. Non-waged incomes, okay, informal market activities. But here also is a question of government grants as well. So because then the literature is talking about three spaces of social reproduction. It can either be the employer, it can be the household, or it is government. And we find a trend here that actually got me asking questions when we were in South Africa. I think the picture on top really is Ghana, and the picture below is so it's the picture on top is Upper West region, and the picture below is Abelele, and the striking thing was that there was no rural economy, and subsistence production was a problem. One, because they were on land that did not allow it, and when we got there, it had not rained for 2 years. And we stayed in a hotel, and one morning we woke up and it was raining, and so we were very happy. But of course, when we got to the research community, there was no rain. It had not rained for 2 years, and I think South Africa is going through a drought, and already the cattle, the larger livestock, were beginning to die as well. So that was striking. I mean, coming from Ghana, because the top picture is the Upper West region. They have a problem. They only have rain 3 months in the year, which is what directs the migration flow. So there's only rain 3 months in a year. So agricultural activity is 3 months in a year. Now, so I asked myself really, and not just myself, but I also engaged with my research colleague. What does this mean as well? And you find there that every need of theirs is provided by shops. So they have tax shops, and everything is bought. So there is a heavy state social protection system, which is really very important. But for that, really, there's no way people could live. And this is supported by the fact that a number of people have engaged in and most of them we interviewed, everybody had worked all their lives, but then the kinds of work they did, even though they worked throughout, did not allow them to earn pension. So it is on this basis that there's so much social grants, and the number of social grants that did not exist in Ghana. Right, okay. So here you find out that then the social reproduction has moved to the state. And in Ghana, the state is not offering any kind of social reproduction. There are forms of interventions. But when we got to this research area, in Ghana it's very new in the first place, and when we got to this research area, a number had not heard about it, and we were told that they have now started registration to do the cash transfers. But it really was highly developed, and this is how people then survive as well. So the whole point then about this reproduction, social reproduction, then sits in three contexts. One, people have talked about the future, so the intergenerational reproduction, the future workforce, children, and as they grow, and what happens to them, and who is responsible for them, and how much then that falls within how much who takes care. Because in South Africa there was a child care grant, child care grant, but then in Ghana it doesn't exist. But they have to survive. So what happens? And then the present labor force, if they are working, how adequate is their income to support them? Is it enough? And even support their households? But then what about periods when they are searching for jobs? What about periods of unemployment? And then the past labor force, those who have served their term and no longer useful, those who have retired. Are they on pension? What kinds of pension? And if they're on pension, is it adequate? How are they supporting themselves and all that? So really the main question was that who is bearing the cost of social reproduction? And what are the different levels of the cost bearing? and all that. Okay, I'm still exploring this. Let me talk a little bit about, I'm sorry I keep going backwards and forwards, but let me talk a little bit about Obuasi. The Obuasi mine actually dates to 1879, and when we visited the mine, we found some small write-up in a corner actually saying that it belonged to two brothers. Now I'm searching my head for this, but these were local people, and they use what was called traditional methods, because before European contact there was trade in gold. I mean, if you read history of Africa, there was trade in gold, and then we also are aware that there was also contact with the Arab world before European contact as well. So that existed, and so there was gold mining, and that these two brothers then approached when after European contact and gold mining has started. It's interesting, because then, in fact, the first European contact we are told is who was this guy that was sailing to the New World and discovered Africa, and that he stopped in a place at the coast to set his compass and called it Elmina, Portuguese, meaning the mine. And the thing about Ghana, it's not just Ghana. I think it goes all the way to Mali. It's how much gold there is. People can actually sweep their backyard and the harvest gold is that bad, and it creates a lot of trouble for us. So, but then somehow it was taken over by the British. So in between, we are not sure what happens to this Obuasi mine. But still, it has remained the largest. It's having its own difficulties as well. But then it produced about 50% of all the revenues in gold, and after cocoa, it used to be the biggest foreign exchange earner. That really it's also contested, because then people are saying it's the biggest foreign exchange earner, but how much of it is retained and all that as well. But the interesting thing is that now is the Anglo Gold Ashanti, and I was in a conference just recently, and Anglo Gold Ashanti is already in Latin America, also looking for concessions as well. It's fully privatized. It's gone through a series of privatization, state control, and all that. And then just about 12 years ago, the state sold its 20% share under very controversial issues as well. So it's listed on international stock and all that. So it's this kind of gold mine I'm talking about that these people have had. So what has been this historical connection between Obuasi and the mines? In fact, when you look at the history of mining, and Cripps has a very interesting work on mining in Ghana, where he looks at these mine workers as well. But the literature, not just Ghana, but everywhere, is talking about the need for labor as well. And this need for labor, it has to be cheap. And it can only be cheap if the state support to create a labor reserve. A labor reserve which is created through all kinds of means. But one is how much resources you send to that area. And the fact that within the forest belt where the gold is, how am I doing with time? Okay. Within the forest belt where the gold mines are located, because of the presence of cash crops, people were not interested in working on the gold mines. So there was a real problem. People were not interested, they were. So this introduction of a cash economy that would have pushed people to work in the mines was not possible because they could get cash through cash crops. And in the forest belt, we have what we call the double rainfall. So you have 3 months in around May, and then it peaks around May, and then it goes off, and then you have about 2 months again also between around September and October. So it's possible to farm all year round. But then in northern Ghana, people can only farm for 3 months. Right. So 9 months they have nothing doing. So then this is what triggered the thing. But even when there had been a flow, the chiefs in northern Ghana were obliged to supply a certain amount of labor to the colonial administration. And it also came as something interesting for me, because then we know that the French and the Portuguese were the bad guys that were doing forced labor, all kinds of forced labor. But then it shows also that within Ghana there was forced labor as well. So we find a situation where road networks to northern Ghana, the distribution of industries, the distribution of schools and all that, very poor. So the only way they could be part of their cash income was to migrate. And the migration, so this established very early relationship. And when we were there doing the data gathering, there were some who remember that trucks would come during the off season. There were trucks from the mines will actually go to the various communities, and they just hop on, and they told us, as soon as you get to Obuasi, you got your job. And one of the interviews, there was this man that was saying that when he got his first salary, he actually went to the person paying him and said, I think you've made a mistake. And he said, no, I haven't made a mistake. Are you sure all this money is mine? And he said, yes, indeed, it's yours. But you see, we know from the literature that these were really very bad wages, But then he was getting something that he would, and he was saying that, look, in all his life, and he hadn't seen that amount of money in his life, So that was something really interesting for them. But as we said also, despite these low wages, then they would come because one, there was nothing doing, and two, they could earn this income, and they would just take advantage of the window and then go back to farm as well. Now, there were those who have stayed because we were first in Obuasi in order to trace the link. And so when we're in Obuasi, there were those who have stayed and all that. But there's a very strong connection with the, what do you call it? The land. I'll come to it. But even those who stayed had said that then they also were engaged in farming, and they were telling us about their farms, and they were saying that, well, really, if we didn't really come at a good time, otherwise they would have given us some of their harvest and all that. The other thing was that the men were the ones that were migrating, and then women would join. Those who would stay, wives would join. But then the wives that joined hardly found work in the mines. They would start some petty trading around their domestic skills. So it's normally around food processing or around their brew, they called pito, made out of sorghum and millet. It's an alcoholic beverage as well. Yeah. But these were considered as really very interesting, important for family survival. So these were some of the things that really came out for us, because we found it interesting that they were still farming. And when we asked, then they'll say, well, how can you survive on your mine salary? You have to farm. And we are farmers and we need to farm. And so then they carry this connection with the land, even into the urban community. Because then, and they said the mines management was also very permissive, and once you ask for land on a concession that was not being developed, you'd be given the land and you could farm as well. Okay. So what was this? As I've said, the link to the land, people have said, okay, so I've already explained this. The migrant labor and the principal means of exchange between the two modes, the farm worker during off-farm seasons and return and all that. Okay, yeah. But for us, the whole thing about land in Ghana is governed by what we call legal plurality. It creates its own problems. But so this is the coexistence of statutory law and customary law. And customary law means the norms and traditions of specific ethnic groups. And in fact, we even find that sometimes the norms and traditions vary within dominant ethnic groups, and there are variations. So this creates its own problem. And we have a situation where people are talking about land indiscipline, because as land gets commercialized, you find a situation where, so let me explain this customary law that governs land. You have land holding groups, and land holding groups can be clans, they can be ethnic groups, right? And the leaders of the land holding groups hold the allodial title in trust for the land holding group. And in principle, every member of the land holding group has equal access to land, right? But there are problems for women, because depending on the inheritance system, women are either outsiders of their land holding group, right? So if the inheritance system is patrilineal through the father line, then women then cannot have access to the land, right? They are deemed as wives, but then within their husbands' land holding groups also, they do not have access to their husbands' land holding groups. So a number of things. In Ghana, we have two systems of inheritance. We also have the matrilineal inheritance, and people have said this is better. It gives women better access. But you see, even in them, you have to actually be in the community where your land is in order to be able to access. You have to be resident. So once marriage, women move to join their husbands, then they lose access to land. And in fact, for a number of women in Ghana, they spend their adult working life in marriages. So then you lose that access. Now, when women in patrilineal societies have been given land also, they cannot pass it over to their children. Because if they pass it over to their children, they are passing it over to another patrilineal group, because their children do not belong to their land holding group. Does it make sense? If you are in a patrilineal system, right, you inherit through your father's line, right? So if you as a woman, you get land through your father's line, right, your father gives you land, right, you cannot pass it over to your son who belongs to his father's land holding group. You are depriving your own land holding group. So these are some of the tensions, and all that you cannot pass it on, and what does it mean and all that. But what this then means is that let me go, because okay, I think that's okay. Okay. So this is this then I'm coming to this. Let me what happens is that within the household, women and men in all the ethnic groups, women and men have different provisioning roles, and women have to contribute to the cooking pot. And so, and if it's a subsistence household, then it means that women also need access to their own land, right? Because that cooking pot, and the division really is around the staples and the vegetables. So the staples are seen as more important, and this is what the men contribute. And this contribution comes from what is seen as the household farm, which really is the husband's farm, right? And then women get smaller plots of land. They are closer to the house to the homes and all that. And I found this really very interesting because when I was in Mexico, I thought there was a similar situation around what's the term for it? It will come very soon. Okay, the milpa. Yeah, the milpa. So at one level, people have said that look, the vegetables also have a role to play in, but then they are not seen as key ingredients. It's the staples, the cereal staples, and the carbohydrate staples that are seen as a key ingredient. And so that gives men then greater entitlement to land, and women should get smaller lands. And even where they don't, you find that they farm on the edges of the household farm. And in one of the communities, they laughed and said, "Oh, you can always tell a woman's farm. They want to plant everything, you know." This was a focus group with the men. They want to plant everything, but they want to plant everything because everything goes to make the soup. You know, the leafy greens, the legumes, and all that. Okay, so this also has not just entitlement to land, but also entitlement to labor, because then the household farm is seen as the farm, and marriage then comes with labor rights, because once married, the woman is obliged to offer free labor on the household farm. And people explain high levels of polygyny also in rural communities around that, because then it provides access to labor. Okay, so that then women have little time for their own farms, the household farms, which creates its own this thing. But well, let's go back to the connection to land. What we discovered, especially in Obuasi, but even when we went to the three communities, was this whole high connection to land, the whole feeling that they have to go back home, and they were going home. And if you look at the distance, it costs a little. It's not cheap, you know, that they have to do, but they invest, and everybody has to go home at least once a year, those who have permanent residence in Obuasi, around festivals and rites of passage and all that. And there are some who even will give up employment because they have to take leadership role within the kin group in their communities as well. So there's this whole thing about this sense of belonging and this whole desire to go back home. And one wonders, and one would want to push this and find out where it's coming from, because then it serves a purpose. It serves a purpose because it keeps this link to the land, and it helps with the social reproduction as well. Yeah. So what were some of the support systems we found? Sorry if I'm going round and round and round. A number of support systems. First, between parents and their children. You know, and we found out that now, because one of our theses also was that we felt that whereas in the past the remittances were going from urban to rural, we believe that the remittances are going from rural to urban. And indeed, we found some that now the mines are not offering jobs the way they do. So the jobs have collapsed, and people who are retrenched and all that, they still think they might find a job, and they are not finding jobs. So then there's talk about how we had to sell this cattle in order to send money to people in the urban areas and all that. And then they called and said they were going to get a job, and they're asking for so much money, and we needed to send money down and all that. And then there's also this connection between children and their parents. So it changes when children are now earning income, and what support they offer, and a number of them. One of the interesting things we found out, because then these and those we interviewed had worked for quite a long time. They were not doing casual work. They were actually engaged as permanent workers, but a number were sacked. And when you ask a number of reasons. But one of the interesting things we found was that they said, well, we stole gold. And I mean, and they say this as a focus group discussion, and then someone says, "You ask him, I stole gold. He was stealing gold. He was never caught, but I was caught." I said, but why do you steal gold? How do you survive if you don't steal gold? The wages are so low, so we're always stealing gold. So then they get sacked as well. We found this really very interesting. But what was happening was that a number were sacked, lost their jobs, and there's always a reason why they lost their jobs. So very few were on pension, even though they had worked for a long period. Very few were on pension. And so they relied on their children also. And there's an interesting link, because then the children are in urban centers and are sending remittances, right? But then also they also are sending farm produce to their children. And when we ask, they're saying that, well, their salaries are so low, how can they survive? So we send them foodstuffs so that they can send us money, and so that we can use this money also for our money needs, because the other thing. There was one interesting thing about someone who was on pension, and pensions are paid in the middle of the month, right? And so they have a way of sharing, because then the son's salary is also very low. And so, and he gets paid at the end of the month. So when he's paid, then it's shared. And when he gets a salary also in the middle of the month, then it's shared. So every 2 weeks, they have some income to share and all that. Then there also were all these marital unions and all that. And a number, when they got income, would give their wives some kind of capital that the wives were supposed to invest in some trade. And so when they retire, this is also what they survive on. And their wives were involved in trades and all that. And there was this case of this man who lived in Wa and had 3 wives. One was in Obuasi, one lived with him in Wa, and the other lived in one of the communities that we visited, And there was this interesting link, because the one that lived in Obuasi was selling farm produce, and the farm produce was provided by the one that was in this rural community, and helping her access and accumulate and all that. So really very interesting network of reciprocity and all that. Another thing we found was there was this old man who said he had a farm. But then he was saying that he can't move, and so how are you farming? And he's saying that, well, the young men, I go and I ask them, and they go to my farm, and then they farm for me, they harvest and all that. So there are all these networks. So long as you have land, right, you can also rely on others. So he can hardly move. But then this kinship sense of reciprocity really very, very high amongst them as well. So a number of mutual support systems and all that. Another thing we found also, and this was coming out in the interviews, and especially with the retired men who still had wives, talking about how important it is for their wives to earn income, and how we are relying on the women, and if it weren't for the women, we'll be dead and all that. So we found during the interviews the mutual savings group. And they told us that, well, we better hurry up. They meet every morning at 6 Sunday morning between 6 a.m. and 7. And really very interesting. I want to share some pictures with you. I hope you can see. Even though they are dominated by women, they always need a man to be secretary. And we found one group that had maybe about 5% men, and we asked the men, why don't you form groups? And they said, well, we men, we are too wise, it never works when we do it as well. So they have this they are too wise, they are too sensible. So it means then that the women compromise, but because the men they are too wise, they are not ready to compromise and all that. So they cannot. Everybody wants to be boss, that kind of thing. Yeah. So what we have here is this metal box. I don't know if you can see what's in the metal box in the middle up here. Well, I think I need to get okay. Uh, does it work? So there's this metal box and it has 3 padlocks, and so 3 people keep the key and they live in different places. So then when the meeting starts, then they come and open it, and there are different bags. One bag is for savings, one bag is for levies, and they have different kinds of levies and all that. And one bag is also for income, because they also form labor pools, and they work on each other's farms. But then sometimes those who are not in the group, and sometimes the men need, especially around harvesting and all that. There are times in farming when you need to mobilize labor, a certain number within a short time. Then they would come, they will negotiate their price, they go and work, and when they earn income, then they add to it. And then people can borrow, and people borrow. And the book, I think it's not, so they have books, and then there's a stamp, how much you pay, then there's a stamp, and each stamp, depending on the group and how much they decide as well. So this really also is all this part of mutualism, building support networks and finding their own sources of credit, because credit is a big issue. And off farming trading is what holds the 9 months, that holds the family. So this is where we were meeting with the groups and all that we really found interesting. Okay. So, well, these were things that are emerging, but then I go back to some of the questions that is still there in literature, and I still think that I don't have answers, and I don't know. I'm still looking at the literature, at the data that we gathered, and I'm still asking myself questions, the forms of kinship distribution networks that exist, because really we are finding so many. What kinds of patterns can we give to these networks? And then what networks, how do the networks shape this redistribution of income, and how does it have any influence on livelihoods? And there's this question also that was in one of the literature, I forget which as well, but the whole transfer of reproduction costs, so depending on the economic situation, depending on different forms of resistance and protest, some costs are borne by the state. At what point does the state take up? At what point does the employer take up? And at what point does the family take up? So I'm done, and I thank you all for listening to me. I didn't bring a pen. You're welcome. I didn't bring any.
So we've had a wonderful mosaic of many different aspects of the rural economy, and questions of capitalist accumulation, questions of rural-urban linkages. Yeah, I already have some questions, but I would like to ask the audience first.
Can someone lend me paper? I completely forgot to bring paper, and I'm borrowing pen.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
So, are there any questions from the audience, or comments, or criticisms, completely different opinions? So if this is not the case, maybe I can start. I would like to come back to this question of rural-urban linkages, because the normal way when we talk about remittances, we have this idea of okay, the migrants from the urban centers or even from the north are basically supplying remittances to their parents or to their families who stayed in the rural villages to basically support their livelihoods. From your theoretical approach, you're actually starting from a different angle. You're saying, okay, according to the modes of production approach in development theory, it is actually the other way around. It is the case that the subsistence economy, the rural subsistence economy, actually subsidizes the capitalist relations of production by supporting the subsistence, supporting the livelihoods of those who don't earn enough with their wages to basically survive. Now, what would be your result from the interviews, from the empirical studies? In which direction of support is stronger? The support from urban to rural areas by remittances, or the support from rural to urban by the subsistence sector?
Yeah. Yeah. My interest really is in non-waged forms of what should I say? Non-money forms of income. Okay. So it's not as if one is discounting the role of cash remittances, but the whole point is that there are other forms of incomes that are important in supporting not just rural livelihoods, but also urban workers. And this is what I'm engaging in. So the question of these remittances and what they offer, cash remittances and what they offer, I'm not saying that they don't exist, but I'm saying that there's enough on that, but there's very little on these other forms. My interest is driven also by the fact that I'm interested in women's care work and the way in which it is discounted, right? And so if you want to engage care work, you also have to pick up other forms of what do you call it, non-wage, unpaid labor, which really we have difficulty in accounting for. And so I don't go there because of my focus. Okay. I hope I have answered your question.
Yeah, so basically your point would be, okay, I'm not saying that the direction, the support from rural to urban areas is definitely more or is stronger, but it's basically not being seen and it's not being accounted for. And this is what we should look at, the non-income remittances supplied by the rural areas. Okay. Yeah. Further questions? Eva Schlecht?
And if you're sending a mountain or whatever, to a family member to sell it in the market, that involves costs. And seeing the sometimes quite low prices of staples, my interest would be how much does this transport from A to B eat up of your final revenue? And is there also this kind of cash flow via M-Pesa and other systems? So the mobile phone money transfer that is very common now in East Africa, how far is it already involved in Ghana?
Okay. Yeah. The crops that are transported, there are two directions. There are those that are transported just for consumption, and there are also those that are actually large scale for sale. And they they must make some profit, because otherwise they won't send it. The other thing is that these are also areas that are responsible for those crops that they are sending. So these are areas that are growing all our legumes, all our yams and all that, millet, sorghum. So then others are coming for it, so they will use the same system. But what happens is that there's always someone visiting from Obuasi. And so if you are visiting, then you always have to go and take back. So this is also all this whole thing about the mutual support system. So you are going back, and you are going back with a bag full of things for people in Obuasi. And for them, it is the income they save by not having to purchase that particular food. Okay. So if you ask them how much this is, they can't tell you, but that's the income that they have saved. Indeed, mobile money is what it's called. It's there in Ghana, and that's one kind of technology that the rural economy. It really is coming up and very fast. And I remember one of the interviews, then the man we were interviewing, he was telling us that, look, now mobile money is all here and all that, because the roads, actually there are problems with the pastoralists, the Fulani. They really have attracted a bad name, and that's what everybody explains. But sometimes vehicles have been, it's carjacking, then people have been robbed of money. So now people don't want to travel with cash on them anymore. So they are using the mobile money. There are wide stretches of what do you call it, where there's no habitation and where there's no mobile phone coverage, and this is where all these things happen. And because of the nature of the road and high temperatures, there's a tendency also for journeys to begin at night. People want to travel at night because then the roads are cooler and all that. So all kinds of things happen. So this is one thing that is moving mobile money. But then also that's also how remittances are sent. And this special relationship between this family and his daughter and his son, the middle of the month and end of the month, they were using mobile money transfers.
I was wondering whether between the two case studies of South Africa and Ghana, whether there were any noticeable differences or if there was quite similar. I'm not sure if the data is very sure.
Yeah.
Can we take another question?
Yeah, okay.
I'm a bit concerned about the system of ownership of land. Has it been disrupted, like this customary law that has been used over and over again? Has it been disrupted over time such that now there's a shift to the statutory kind of holding of land rather than the customary law? And what has been the position so far?
Yeah, okay. So let me take the last question. There's a trend towards land title registration. Okay, asking people to register their land title, and this has a problem because then the title holder is holding that land in trust for the land holding group. People have said that really the customary land tenure system is inherently democratic because everybody has equal rights, and once you are there, you can exercise that right once you belong to that land holding group. But there's also a situation where the customary leaders of the group sometimes transfer this customary ownership into private ownership and so sell the land. But the problem is that where the landholding group is really very big, then the leadership is also not clear. So you have multiple sales of land. And I have friends who have bought a same piece of land 3 or 4 times, because then each group comes and has legitimate claim to that land. So you, depending on who you access and all that. So the World Bank has come in because land and access to land is important for investments. And so the World Bank has come in and is funding this land administration policy. And it's been going on lap 1, lap 2. And they realize that we need to have some kind of a uniform customary. What is customary law? It's not clear. So there's been this controversial codification. So going around and talking to people and asking them, so what is the practice and how does it work and all that. And we have had issues with that because whose custom? And it's normally the same heads of landholding groups that are telling the consultants what the practices are, So there's a land reform bill, and I was part of the what do you call it? The group. When the group that did it, there was some kind of a consultation, a presentation of what goes into the bill, and they tell us that they are putting together, and even the statutory has a problem because there are 160 legal instruments relating to land. Okay, so there is also a need then to come with a land bill. And here then the issue of women's right to land came up. And I must say that there's the leader of the group, a man, quite elderly but very clear. And after he was done, then people in the room were teasing us and said, now you women's rights activists, you have nothing to say. Now what this law says is that especially land acquired during the process of marriage, whether it is registered in an individual name or the collective name, it is deemed to be registered in the collective interest of the couple, right? And you can only dispose of it with the permission of the other partner in the relationship. And marriage, in this sense, does not need a legal instrument, insofar as you can show that you live together and perform the services of a partner. And you have people to show. And that land was acquired with proceeds during the tenure of the relationship. So how we are coming to this, really, we are dealing with these kinds of ownership rights. So spousal property rights. It's a way in which we are seeking to deal with it. And also inheritance rights, because the customary inheritance rights are a problem, especially in matrilineal societies. Husband and children do not belong to the same family in matrilineal households. So when the man has died, if you are going to customary law, then his property passes to his family. And that will be his uterine brothers and sisters, his mother's children, not even his father's children. And that has been a problem. So, of course, with a lot of activism, there has been a uniform inheritance law, intestate succession law that applies. And this is also one way in which women then can seek access to land. But this is only land that has been individually acquired, not land that belongs to the landholding group.
Back to the first question related to the differences or different results in the case studies of Ghana and South Africa.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, sorry. We have noticed differences. One is the differences in who is bearing the reproduction cost. The state, a strong presence of the state. The other is the other one is the rural economy and what form it takes. And so, but in South Africa also, we did discover, we discovered also this, now we are told there are forward linkages. So the backward linkage is the traditional remittance from urban to rural, right? But in South Africa also there is a forward linkage where people are using their grants, social grants, to support families in the urban centers. So here cash is involved. Okay. So there are different forms, but then they are there in the urban centers and they can't find jobs. Okay. So they share their cash remittances with them, and that was really very strong. And in fact, this was one of the hypotheses also that was pushing this research, that the flow is reversing, and this is how it is reversing.
Post-development approaches always claim, well, people are looking for alternatives to the capitalist economy because it's not providing for them. The formal sector cannot accommodate all those who have lost their livelihoods in terms of enclosures, etc. Now, what you have told us about northern Ghana, that there is this, well, that there are community networks, that there is mutualism, something which could be subsumed under some kind of economy of solidarity. Now, my question is twofold. First of all, does this refer to kinship networks only, or does it go beyond that? And my second question related to that, are these traditional practices which have been there since I don't know when, or are these reactions to crises of capitalism?
Okay. Yeah. Let me begin with your last question. They really are embedded within traditional practices because there's this whole sense of mutualism that you have to give to people that have less than you. So it really it's embedded within the traditional practices. And this same traditional practices also, that gives a certain sense of responsibility to your family ties and all that. So yes, indeed, it is. And but then the responsibilities expand. And I come to your first question, beyond kinship networks. So insofar as you have some connection with somebody, then you really have to support that person. But sometimes also these connections also are through kinship networks. So then one way it worked in the formal sector in Obuasi was the fact that once you got a job in the mines, then everybody connected to you should get a job, and then they would say that this is my brother, and when you ask, they are not brothers, but then they come from the same community. So the whole sense of about someone being my brother, about someone being my sister, also, and all that. And this old man I was talking to you about that was getting labor. These were not young men that he had kinship relationship with, but because they lived in the community, they were obliged once he has asked to support that. Yeah. I would like to
continue, maybe we can come back to one of the last comments we decided.
Pardon.
One of the most productive percentage in the networks, in the informal networks, is this one.
Yeah.
I did not understand the photo, in fact. When we're sitting together, what are they doing? Because you explain in your talk, and it's absolutely interesting that they are going to meet daily in the morning, the early morning hour. So I'm wondering, what are they doing? What are they talking about? When doing, what does it mean, this network of women sitting together and doing what and talking about what? Are they planning some sort of cooperation, of doing the work? What is going on there?
Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. This is something we came across. So it's a savings group, a women's savings group, right? And they meet every Sunday, once a week, from 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. And there are different groups. The whole point is that it shouldn't go beyond 25. Yeah. But the savings, every week, every woman, they pledge some amount of money. So every week, then the women will come and give their contribution. And then there are people, they have an executive and they render accounts. So how much has been received? And they have different bags in which they keep their monies. So there's one money for the contribution. And I also mentioned that there's another bag also for levies. So people are levied if they don't come to meetings, or they come to meetings late, they are levied. So there's a bag for that. And then they also lend out money. Okay. And when they lend out the money, there's an interest. So there's another bag that keeps the interest. And then they also earn income. So they come together as a group and work on people's farms, and they earn money. So there's another bag for that. Now they say that, well, there's this box and we have 3 padlocks. But they try as much as possible not to leave too much money in the box, because if someone picks it up, then it's gone. So, when they meet, they render account, and then if people have people pay their contributions, people pay their levies, people pay their interest, those that are borrowed, and then the announcements if they have to work and all that. And then if someone needs a loan, then that person will ask for the loan. If they have enough money, they give it. If they don't have enough money, then they explain and all that. So this is what the meetings are for. But it is 1 hour, 6 and 7, and it's over. Okay.
So any other questions? Maybe the last one.
I was wondering in how far are you planning in future to get a bit more quantitative in your studies? Because I see previously I went away with the impression there's a family, they're sending some migrant labor to some town, and that one is sending remittances back. Maybe that construct will increase the overall income and well-being of their family. And now I'm left with the impression sending somebody somewhere, or somebody moving somewhere and finding a job or hoping to find a job, does not necessarily increase the income of the overall family. It can maybe level out periods of low liquidity with periods of high liquidity, still improving the overall well-being of the group. Now, in how far are you planning to become a bit more quantitative to maybe get an idea on that aspect?
Actually, I must say that my interest really is for more in-depth studies. So doing more in-depth studies and looking at different forms, because I want to be able to explain why and not so much to establish patterns. So I'm not planning to go quantitative. Okay.
So maybe this is something you would have to supply.
There's no competition.
Okay, so I see no more questions, so all that is left for me is to thank once more our visiting Professor Akua Britwum